Yeah, right. How's it, Mr. Hlagala?
Hi, all is well, sir. And yourself?
No, very good. Thanks for joining me. I think just for a bit of background for everybody else, I met Tokelo, I think it's now 4 or 5 years ago, ne?
Yeah, I think it was like 2018.
2018, so
Yeah,
5 years ago. Time flies, eh?
yeah, it does.
Yeah, no, I was giving a seminar, I think at Stay Easy Hotel on finance. I think the gents had organized essentially a whole day of productivity and always trying to stimulate progressive thought, putting on authors, that sort of a thing. I think if you can see behind which side do I move, his book is there.
Yeah, that side. Yeah, yeah.
It's available on Amazon. Essentially, it speaks about education, and I think one of the things that triggered this conversation, I've spoken to Tokelo before. We've tried to work on apps that work on education and how we can bring out financial literacy, that sort of a thing over the years. But I think, as you know me, I'm a long-term investor, so there's no wasted relationships.
Yeah.
Some nuggets you link over the years, and I'm certain that this conversation is long overdue. Over the weekend, I think Tokelo posted something. It was a Harvard class, I think, or I think
Yeah.
Harvard has a similar class where it's the case study method, where in essence they will perhaps give you a case study, you come to class, and instead of the lecturer lecturing, they will allow the students to interact with one another and agree and disagree. So in this current um,
Mhm.
just because you can imagine, for example, if you have Israelis and Palestinians at Harvard sitting in class, and there you go, bash it
Yeah.
out, defend your side, Ukrainians and Russians, blacks, whites, that sort of a thing. And I think with the work you posted there, that with your students, you always try and inculcate that sort of environment. So for
Mhm.
backgrounds, I think Tokelo is lecturing for Rhodes University and
No,
helping
it's Syracuse.
it.
Syracuse University.
Syracuse. Oh, okay. Oh, flip. Look at that.
Yeah.
I remember when you posted your initial collaborations with the US and renowned people abroad there. As I say, we're
Yeah.
watching and thinking, no, let's see how far it goes because he then expands what we're able to engage on and the type of discourse. So I think I feel very privileged to have a conversation with you today. I think you can say a few words if you want, but I think we can basically jump straight into it. Um,
Mhm.
the trigger being what you posted, or at least at the back, the synopsis to your book, where it speaks about your experience with rich folk, poor folk, street vendors, you name it, and some of
Mhm.
the misconceptions and biases that we have towards poverty and how folk ultimately become poor. Um, over to you, my man.
Yeah, no, no, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So essentially, I think to give context into what actually the book is about. So for me, the book is essentially illuminating the human condition as to pertaining the current state of things in the country. To
Yeah,
say this is where we are as a country, this is the state.
yeah,
So it sort of goes deeper to say how did we get to where we are,
yeah,
but it does this through fiction.
yeah,
So I usually tell people that I don't necessarily write fiction, but for me it's more of exaggerated reality
yeah,
because these stories, as much as they look like fiction, but these are things that I see on a daily basis.
yeah,
And through my writing, I just look for creative ways of delivering these stories and essentially starting conversations with people to say, what are some of your ideas about poverty and prosperity?
yeah,
What are some of the things that have, been the impediment towards you empowering yourself and those type of things? And
yeah,
so essentially the work that I'm doing now has been in the space of education to say, um, where we are as a country, what can be done in order to, deliver us to the promised land, for a lack of a better word. So yeah, essentially the book is not necessarily even giving answers to the problems we are having, but it's more of illuminating the problems we are having and then saying, now that we understand where we are, what is the next step from here? How do we go forward? So yeah, essentially the book leaves the reader with a lot of questions instead of answers, to say, this is what people have to go through in order to make ends meet. This is what, empowerment looks like, but is it really empowerment in terms of attaining that degree from these prestigious universities? What is the job market like? What are some of the struggles that young people, most Black people, have to go through in order to get to prosperity? So yeah, that is just the context of the book, and maybe we can begin the conversation from there and see where it goes and how it flows.
Yeah. Why nonfiction? I mean, why fiction? Sorry.
Yeah, I think for me it's better to communicate from fiction. I feel like it's easier for people to engage with stories than it is to engage with nonfiction, like books that have statistics. So I feel like through fiction it's easier to captivate people, and now that allows that conversations to begin, to say, okay, based on this character, what can we make about this thing? So yeah, I think essentially, and yeah, even like Black people essentially, or people generally, have been communicating through stories. Whether you take this thing from religion, when you read the Bible, it's all fictional stories, and so, but then through these stories, we are able to start conversations about real problems and real issues that affect people. So yeah, I felt that communicating through fiction might be easier for me also as a creative, to say, yeah, let me just, take the creative route, the fiction route, and see how this thing unfolds. But then it's not to say I'm limited to fiction, because currently there's a book that I'm working on, but this one is on business. So this one is based on real life stories. So it's a non-fiction book. It's more of an academic type of, approach.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm assuming when you say the access that fiction gives you is that it lets the reader essentially let go for a bit. It's art, it allows you
Yeah, true.
to be the artist and to say, trust me to take you through this journey. And then if you
Yeah,
don't like it, you can always go back to reality. But if you do like,
yeah.
you can see what elements you can borrow and then use
Mhm.
in reality.
Yeah, true. Because I mean, you look at some of the funds that your HBO and Netflix have invested in telling fictional stories,
Yeah.
because they understand that through these stories, people are able to sort of interact with the various realities, but from a storytelling perspective. So yeah, I think it gives one the freedom to play around with different stories, different characters, but then bring this holistic, human condition for different people coming from different walks of life.
Yeah. And take me through that. We'll come back to the Netflix version. Take me through how you write for, let's say, a 4-year-old versus how you would write, in my case, a 31-year-old graduate, for example. What are the layers of education or the phases of education, and
Mhm,
how do we pick them up as time goes, or at least how do we identify them in real life? And the reason I ask you that is because we always see the tagline or the quotation, Yamadiva, our education is the most powerful weapon you can use, you know.
mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
you have today where it's fashionable, and I don't even think it starts today. Time immemorial, education has always had that dual existence where people will
Mhm,
say that, then on the other hand, people will say, university degree doesn't mean anything. The
mhm,
real value comes in hustling, comes in being able to make money, that sort of thing. But you can't ignore
mhm.
the fact that they are very closely related. I posted about class yesterday.
Yeah.
What is class? What does it mean to be class? And very quickly, education comes up because If
Yeah.
you're not able to
Yeah.
grasp certain concepts, it is difficult for you to have a certain appreciation for life. And as a result, you'll
Mm-hmm.
come across as maybe uncultured or unclassy,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak.
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
tend to think it's got to do with money, not realizing that no, it's got to do maybe
Mm-hmm.
with erudition. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
engage me on that.
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, as you're speaking like that, I was making some notes, and then the first word that I wrote was class.
Yeah,
Before you even mention it,
yeah,
because I think class also has a role to play in learning. I remember I think I was engaging someone regarding the book before publication to say, for me, I think through this book, I'm sort of trying to write stories for people who wouldn't typically be able to write stories for themselves.
yeah,
And so as you go through the book, you meet people who are street vendors or informal laborers that you find standing at an intersection or at a robot. It's a book speaking about women who are prostitutes somewhere. So to say, these are some, these are some of the people who wouldn't typically be able to tell their stories through writing. And so because I see some of these stories as I'm walking the street, why not be that person who is able to sort of tell these stories of the common man for the common man? And
yeah,
so even in how the book is written, I've tried as much as I can to write it from a layman's perspective to say anyone who can read and write might be able to read this book, because these are the stories of people in the township, people in the villages, people coming from all of these marginalized sectors. And so I think class has a role to play, because even in some of these literature events that I go to,
yeah,
there's a certain caliber of people that you meet.
yeah,
There's certain places in which these things are happening. And part of the conversation I had with some of the guys that I worked with some couple of years ago was to say, um, as much as we are doing this literature and book events, but sometimes I question the places in which we are doing these things. To say,
yeah,
you've got your Atteridgeville, Mamelon, what's so not, but we are doing these events in your Rosebank. You
yeah,
know, as much as we do need to occupy those spaces, but essentially some of the people who really need this information are within these areas that some of us come from, the township. So why not try to also build the culture within these spaces, and so that we can, fight, the intellectual aristocracy that seems to be there, to say books are for the intelligent, whereas books should be teaching those who don't know in order to know. So yeah, I think class has a lot to do with it, and it plays a crucial role. And so I think even in our work, we've tried to predominantly work within the townships that we can, particularly within schools, to say we've got these schools in the township. How do we build the culture of learning with these learners from a very young age, so that by the time they leave university, they've got skills of how to analyze context, how to analyze content. So, it's not necessarily to say we want these children to be smart, but we want them to sort of be able to be in a state whereby they can interact with the world, they can read things, they can be able to empower themselves, even if they don't go the traditional or conventional way of education, of going to university. To say there's ways in which you can empower yourself through the various means, but you can't empower yourself if you don't know how to read, or if the culture of reading is not something that you grew up with. So yeah, essentially that is one of the things we are trying to do within the literature space.
yeah. Look, I'm in finance, so I'm always trying to see how can I have an interesting conversation about a topic that I am not so well informed in. Um, but I must still make it interesting. And for me,
Yeah.
often the easiest way is to see how can I make money here, right?
Mhm.
And people say, "Hey, but you love money." Eh?" And I always say to them,
Yeah.
I've found if you can follow the money, you actually can follow where the problem is, why these things that you know are good are not
Mhm.
happening where you think they should be happening, you know?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
as a result, as you're speaking, I'm sitting there thinking, especially because you're talking about class, right? So the first question I'm thinking is, do you think telling our stories or the layman's story will automatically make us classy, or it will just make us understood, right? That's on the one hand. Hold on to that. On the other hand, nah, we are doing it in Rosebank and Sandton and whatever because the ability to look at different social settings and different social classes and different situations that human beings find themselves in, the ability to do that in and of itself shows that we are proper people, we are up class people, such that it's not about the people themselves and their stories. It's about the exercise of meeting to have cheese, wine, biltong, and have conversations about the condition of humans. You know, how do you balance those two? How do you think about my framing of that? Because if you ask me, then it makes a lot of sense to have these conversations in our mahogany wooded offices and country clubs, whatever, and we still get to look good for doing good, right? Versus if we have to go to the township, no offense, what if I get shot? You know, I think let's talk about some of the misconceptions and biases. I would rather talk about the crime, the violent crime, in the comfort of my home than to talk about the violent crime in the situation itself, meaning that I get to enjoy the status that comes with engaging with this subject matter without risking any, without putting any skin in the game or any risk to myself.
No, I mean, when you mention the issue of money, that's a very important and crucial thing because money matters. So for me, it has been a matter of saying, there's gotta be a way in which we make money because without money, you can't sustain the things you're doing. So as much as you might wanna do good in the community, if the financial muscle is not there, then there's no way that you can be able to do some of the CSI initiatives that you want to do, you know. So for me and the people that I work with, essentially what we've done, because there's a business attached to the things that we do, which is more of a publishing house, but we are dealing with various services in terms of knowledge creation and distribution. This could be or include things such as creating courses for different organizations, moderating courses that are there, and also doing publishing. So essentially what we've done in our space is that we've got the business side of things that focus on the finances and doing some of these events in these affluent and strategic places. But then at the same time, we've got another vehicle in the space, which is sort of a CSI initiative that says, we're going to be doing or establishing book clubs in these particular schools in the townships. Because one of the things that I'm realizing is that our schools and our universities are very much underutilized. You know, as much as kids are coming in there to learn from 8 to 2, what are other things that we could be doing within this very space? Because already it's established. You know, what are some of the things we could be doing to drive this thing called education and learning? Because learning doesn't stop at 2 o'clock when schools are out. So essentially, we've tried to also create some of these programs within these different schools. Although I would say it's also not an easy thing because there's also a lot of red tape in terms of working with schools and all of those things. But that is the way in which we're sort of trying to strike balance between, you know, the business side of things and the side that brings money, and also the side that can have impact on the disadvantaged people. And I think essentially, you know, I don't know, maybe it's just my views. It's possible for people to make money and also give back. Because I look at some of the programs that I've been part of, especially with Americans, you know, in that they would come to the country for a period of 30 days. In these 30 days, they will do a variety of programs in different schools in the Eastern Cape. You know, Eastern Cape is one of the most underdeveloped province in the country. And so them coming this side, it's them sort of doing practical learning within the different schools that are there to say, how many schools are there? What can we do in this school for a period of a week? What can we do in this school for a period of a week? And so going around doing different initiatives, implementing certain things that the schools can continue with long after they are gone. So some of these things, I feel they don't necessarily need you to be there full time, but once we can establish some sort of structure of how this program can run, then there's people who can run this system within the school or within the organization. So I think it's very much possible to balance, you know, the area of finances and also the area of saying, let us to some extent give back to the communities.
Yeah. Listen, I saw there you spoke to Obrima Sangwe on one of the nights. Very polished when it comes to speaking to media. I want us to relax. It's a podcast, ne? You know, as you're speaking, I agree with you. I can hear, but I can hear the similar themes. Hushotang, like when you in a room, go Rosebank, ne? And the topic is essentially stories, publishing, what have you. Most people don't know. I'm an investor in a publishing company, Texton, and its subsidiaries, right? Publishing is big money and it's big politics anywhere in the world, you know. Some people don't understand. Jeff Bezos becomes the richest man in the world. And what does he do? He buys the Washington Post. Elon Musk becomes the richest man in the world. What does he do? He buys Twitter. And what those things have in common is that those are platforms to tell stories. Those are platforms to tell narratives. Those are platforms to control voice, so to speak. And I hear you. I think what triggered me to take off my tie, relax, and then let me engage. Let me do this man some justice. When you mention CSI, when you mention you in township schools, you working with infrastructure that they already have, that sort of thing. And I'm thinking there, no, as an investor, Tokelo, I know there's value there, you know? Maybe I just don't see it. You know, I remember one day I bought an artwork for 10,000 rand. I never thought in my life I would do that, you know? I went into an art gallery and I said, I want that. And the person said, no, not a problem. Sat me down and then said, what are your details? And I gave him my details. And then he brought the speed point and it said 10,000. And I said, how? You know, I said, can I buy it at installment? And they said, sure, not a problem. And so I paid it over 10 installments. But I didn't change my mind. I knew I have to have that artwork. Then I did it again 2 years later, where again walked in. This time it wasn't even for sale. It was a hotel, and I saw this picture, and I thought, flip, this is a beautiful picture. And I ignored it. Was there the whole weekend, and we took pictures in front of it, whatnot. After I left, I called the owner back, and I said, Chief, can I buy that painting from you? He said, hey, you're gonna have to make me a very good offer. And now that I have experience, I knew that there's no value that you can put to that feeling that you have, that you recognize when you come across a certain artwork that speaks to you, right? And I said to him, how does 5,000 rand sound? And it was canvas pictures where one half is this side, one half is that side. I sometimes post it. It's called Sunset Dreams, or Kovango Sunset Dreams, or something like that. It shows men on those small fishing boats in Western Africa or Eastern Africa. For me, it says a lot, you know. And he said, no, for one piece, 5,000 rand, the other piece, 5. And I thought to myself, again, I'm spending 10,000 on this particular thing, you know. And it's 10,000 I didn't have. I was broke at the time. So I negotiated. We made it, I think, 8.4 or something like that. And he allowed me to buy it. Why I'm bringing that back context is because when you sit there in those environments, the conversation is very much about expression, about identity, about meaning, about those sort of things. But when we try to engage the business side of it, we make it a fundraiser, we make it a CSI, we make it. Whereas this is one of the most powerful statements you can ever make as a person. You know,
Yeah.
there are houses where if you walk in, you feel an aura, and most people don't understand that that aura comes from all of the expressions that have been collected in this house. The person
Yeah.
doesn't need to tell you the price of the items. You just feel humbled in that environment, and somehow you find yourself deferring to them, right?
Yeah.
Oh, who shot down? Who shot down? If you were given a magic wand and you were to design a situation in which us young black professionals that pop bottles in clubs are rather book collectors, publishing moguls,
Yeah.
what would that transition take? What does it take for me to not spend 2,000 rand on a night out and rather to spend 2,000 rand on a book, and that says the same statement in Jesabanyang? Dintang,
Yeah.
what are we missing?
Yeah. That's a very tough question. It's a tough question, one which I don't have the answer to.
Yeah.
And because for me, I think arriving to where I am in life in terms of career and my aspiration has a lot to do with where I've been, in the sense that for me, things such as transitioning from high school to university, I had some impediments and challenges then, and it was from me recognizing some of these challenges, then me asking myself to say, I've had these challenges, but ultimately I landed in university. So what role can I play in the sense that no other learner has to go through what I went through? And from that point on, then it was a matter of me trying to find different ways of sort of contributing to the education of people around my space, forming partnerships, volunteering with different institutions. And ultimately, all of those have led me to where I am. So I wouldn't know what to say to people when they say, so how do we get people to start, contributing towards education, towards all of these things? It's a very tough one. And also because for me, it's also subjective in that many of the people that I'm around are essentially within what I'm doing. So I'm not even able to see what other people are doing in various spaces. But then I think for me, it's a recognition that politics are not going to help us. They might, but then essentially, as individuals, we've got the power to sort of move something where we are, regardless of where you are in the world. There's one or two things that you can do in order to build a community around you. So essentially, for me, it has also been that to say, yeah, I've been following politics for the longest of time. I've been complaining about the status of things, but how am I helping the situation? And so for me, it came from a perspective of saying, I think there's something that I can do within the space of education. Hence, the book clubs came, hence the writing came, hence the publishing came. So all of these things that I'm doing for me are merely a vehicle of saying, let me see what I can do for the empowerment of not only myself, but the immediate community around me. So I wouldn't know what to say in terms of what can people do. It's a very tough question, and but you also doing it within your space. So I think maybe getting people to understand that there's more to your job. If I'm a CA, yes, I can be a CA at JP Morgan or whatever company, but then I can also do certain things outside the parameters of this employment that I'm doing. I can go and teach kids how to make money in the street, how to do. So perhaps looking at it from that angle of saying, going beyond the scope of what you are doing in your professional career, or using your own career for other things that are outside, what you're being paid for at work. So I would say, yeah, maybe recognition of the fact that your purpose doesn't end where you are working. There's other things that you can do outside, whether it's supporting small businesses, supporting young people, or whatever the case is.
Flex for me. In other words, I mean, you're a publisher and you say it so relaxedly, nah? Versus if I were to
Yeah.
sit and think I want to be a publisher, I would drop a business plan, I would come up with all
Yeah.
the models that then show me, hey, Makhoa own this space, right?
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
if I say, that's why I say flex for me, i.e.,
Mm-hmm.
tell me that journey, but don't tell it from necessarily from a struggle perspective. Tell it more from a this is what this thing has done for me. If you had said for me to go to Cape Town, I need 10,000 Rand. I don't remember in
Mm-hmm.
my life having 10,000 Rand that I just have just to
Mm-hmm.
blow and going to Cape Town. But
Yeah.
after I published so and so, or after I introduced this poet to the world, all of a sudden
Mm-hmm.
I'm meeting Dr. Kumar. All of a sudden
Yeah.
I'm being offered to come to the States to give a lecture. And I'm sitting there thinking, what's happening? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Flex Anyan.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, to paint a picture of how I started the whole publishing thing, it wasn't even an intentional thing.
Yeah.
Just to deviate a bit, and I'll come back to this. I mentioned that there's a book that we are working on entrepreneurship. And so we've been conducting interviews with different entrepreneurs, trying to understand their journey in business. And so one of the thing that came, or one of the theme that came when we were analyzing the data, was that most of these entrepreneurs that we interviewed never really set an intentional goal of becoming entrepreneurs. They just found themselves in a position where they had some sort of skill and they needed money. They were like, let me do this thing for someone. And then the someone recommended someone, referred someone, referred someone. Ultimately, the business began. So for me, my journey began when I left my job. I was working in some project in Mpumalanga in 2019. So it was a project by Exaro, the big mining company. So I left the job because I felt that there was something missing within me. I felt that I was underutilized where I was working. So as a result, I resigned from the work and I'm like, yeah, let me go focus on building my book club. Right. So what happened is after establishing a book club that year, later on in the year, I'm like, we've got this community of readers. And when I'm looking at these people, most of them are writers. So already there's a community and there's a market. Why not establish something that can sort of address the needs of these people, which is publication? And so that is where the publishing company came from. It came from that book club and me recognizing, well, actually, there's a market of people that I can, give these services to for a fee. And so the journey started like that. And ultimately, I decided to write my own book. And part of me writing the book was also for credibility's sake, to say, I'm within this space. I am not conventionally trained in matters of literature. I don't have a degree in literature or in BA. My academic background is in recreation and in sports. So part of me writing the book was also, sedating my mark in the space to say, I'm not only saying I can do this, this book also serves as something that gives credibility to say, this person knows what he's talking about. If I'm editing your book, and then So ultimately, when the book was released, I think it was in 2020, yeah, in the early days of lockdown. So someone contacted me to say, can you come and give a lecture on education for a program we are having, that sort of contrast for education for South African Black people and American Black people. And so I came into the mix because I had been working in the education space years before. And so I gave a lecture on education and all of those things. And a year later, when the book was released and the professors read the book, they were like, we think this blends well into the curriculum that we are building for this honors program for next year and what so not. And so, yeah, they felt that, the book was speaking to whatever they were speaking about within their course curriculum, and it became a prescribed book for this particular program. And from there on, yeah, I've been doing the summer program with them, lecturing and facilitating some of the conversations from the book's perspective, but also from the course perspective. So for me, these are not even things that I had planned, but it's merely things that have come as a byproduct of me saying, I feel I can write a book, me feeling, I feel I can publish a book, me feeling I can do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So most of these things are not even things that I can say I planned or I had this amazing marketing strategy. They merely came from me being in the field and doing what I could with the minimum resources that I had. And you mentioned something along the lines of how publication is mostly white owned. I mean, for me, I look at things from a practical perspective to say, can I get 5 clients in a space of 5 months? So as much as, yeah, the market is owned by predominantly white companies, for me, I'm looking at my immediate environment and networks that I'm having to say, can I get 5 clients? If that's the case, then yeah, let me build this business, because I think there's many reasons on why people shouldn't start businesses. But for me, I mainly look at the basic or the simple reasons why I can. Can I get 1 client? Yeah, let me focus on the 1 client. Let me serve this client and let me see if I can get another client. So yeah, I wouldn't buy into the notion that publication is run by mostly, white companies. Maybe that was the case years then, but now, because I've also have friends who are working within the space, who've got their different companies within the space, I feel like the market has been decentralized to whoever wants to start a publishing company. And also knowing that the audience that I have, someone else doesn't have, and the market that I have, I can easily tap into the market of each and every person that I'm editing or publishing. So if I'm publishing your book, by virtue of publishing your book, it means I've tapped into your market, because now your people are asking, how did you publish? Where did you publish? You're like, no, there's this guy in this part of the world. He did my book. Another person comes. So I feel like for me, yeah, I wouldn't buy into the notion of saying, yeah, the market or the publishing industry is mainly, white owned.
Yeah. We have 90 seconds now. I have an aunt
Yeah.
who is a school principal. She writes books because for her, she can see what the developmental gaps are for children, right?
Yeah.
What does it take to publish? And then also, what does it mean when you see a book roll out in a certain situation? What do you know about the trajectory that it is setting for that group of kids, that community, that sort of a thing?
Mhm.
And if it cuts,
So
I'll just
one,
come back and record again, by the way. Yeah.
so in terms of the trajectory that you mentioned, I think essentially what she is doing, and this is something that I've sort of witnessed in my own area as I'm running these book clubs in these schools, is essentially the fact that she's writing books that some of these kids can easily recognize with, or she's writing stories that these kids can actually see themselves in this book. There's one learner who came to me last year to say, I wasn't aware that I could read a book where there's a character named Tabelo or Tabang, and it's the little things like this where people find recognition to say, oh, these are people in my